Hi everyone, welcome to the Wallaroo.ai Community Tech Talk. For this week, it's April 5th, and spring is in the air if you're in the Northern Hemisphere. If you're in the South, you're probably getting up for winter or another season. But welcome today. We are going to cover how to integrate Azure Kubernetes Wallaroo cluster with an Azure Managed Grafana. And this is a part of the other tech talks and topics that we have on our YouTube channel, where we talk about, you're not just limited to having to use the Wallaroo platform. You can bring your own notebook. We integrate with other technologies that companies have invested in, and that's important because we want to make sure that people that are working with ML models and ML projects are working in an environment that they are familiar and comfortable with, so that we don't have to go through retraining, and that causes delay and costs to a project, and the business delays in getting these models into production. And so integrating with the investments and technologies that you already have is super important. And so this is one of those scenarios today that we'll walk through. We are recording this session, so it will be up on our YouTube channel. And if you're on our YouTube channel watching this, please check out the other content that we have. We're adding stuff regularly, and we're keeping that content fresh and relevant as well. And so as you can see from my screen, this tutorial and this tech talk will be going through a documented tutorial that we have on our docs.wallaroo.ai site. We have a number of different tutorials and scenarios that you can walk through as well. On this site, there's a lot of information, and there's also updated release notes as we release new features and capabilities within the product. So great, we have these tutorials. How can I run through them? Here you ask. So you can actually use the Community Edition, and so you can download that. It's free. The license is, doesn't expire, so there's no 30-day limit or 60-day limit that forces you into pressure a situation to get it deployed. And we know that people are super busy, and so the great thing about this license is you can download it, set it up, and then you can at your leisure go through your own use cases, bring your own notebooks, and you can also use the tutorials that I just showed. And the other thing is important is folks are saying, hey, I have to fill out this form. Are you going to get bombarded with sales folks? No, this is pure for the community to help folks like yourselves and experts in this space to learn, understand, and go through the content and build your skills. Look at the use cases that you have and you're working with in your environment, and then you also get access to our Slack channel, and so we can support you to make sure that you're getting set up if you run into any issues. That's one of the reasons that we just capture that information. So no sales calls that are going to keep bugging you and fill your inbox with that. So that's all good. Let me introduce myself. So my name's Martin Bald. I am the Senior Community Manager at Wallaroo, and it's my job to help connect, engage with experts like yourselves, whether you're data scientist, ML engineer, or you're moving into the AI and ML space and building that skill set. And so we help folks get there. We are a production ML company, Series A startup, and so it's like I said, it's my job to connect with the community, engage, and that's been one of the pleasures of working in this space, not only at Wallaroo but my previous career roles, is just seeing what folks are doing with technology. And it always impresses me that how people are sort of combating problems, issues, and the just imagination that folks apply the use of technology to solve business problems. And so with that, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague John Hanserick, who is here with me today, and John will take us through the rest of this tutorial. So thank you again for being here, and John, over to you.
Okay, just one moment here. Let me start sharing my screen. So let me verify that you can see that okay. And if everything's good there. All right, so yeah, I am John Handrick. I'm the senior technical writer at Wallaroo. Seen a lot of seniors here today. So I'm in charge of taking care of all the documentation, the tutorials, the examples. If you check out first of all, our documentation site at docs.wallaroo.ai, and you can also find our GitHub repository where we have all sorts of notebooks and sample models, sample data, things that you can use about how to train a model, how to deploy a model, how to use a model. So I'm in charge of all of that. And today I get the pleasure of showing you all how to use Grafana with an Azure Managed Cluster to track performance and see what else is going on. Now, part of the reason why we have this going on is that whether you install Wallaroo Community or Wallaroo Enterprise, we have a set of scripts that are involved that you can deploy on Microsoft Azure directly. So this is the sample for Wallaroo Community, and then this is the one for Wallaroo Enterprise version. So since Wallaroo installs into Kubernetes environment, these are both some templates of how to get an Azure cluster running, and that way you can then deploy Wallaroo to it. But if this can be any Kubernetes cluster in Azure period, it doesn't have to be one that's hosting Wallaroo or not. You can use the same point in time. But the point of this is not just to show the Azure cluster. We're going to assume we've already got that. We're going to show how to use Azure Managed Grafana to show all sorts of useful things. And just a quick example here. Here's a short example of a cluster that's been running. There we go. With our different pods and the like. It doesn't want to show me some of the information. I'll have to refresh that in a moment. But what you can do is show off CPU utilization, networking, memory space, all the things you need to know about how your cluster is performing and the like. So with that, let's go and jump right into that. So let's assume that you're running Microsoft Azure, that you have a Kubernetes service. So in my case, let's start off with one that I've got available. So you can find those either by going to Kubernetes services or by typing in Kubernetes in your search string and get a list of your clusters. Now, we'll be working with two clusters in this example. This one, Wallaroo CE Helm. If you go down into the insights, this is where the monitoring and other information is. This one doesn't have anything configured as of just yet. Oh, actually, that's not true. I'm sorry. That one is the other cluster, Wallaroo CE Docs, doesn't have anything configured just yet. So suppose we wanted to see the information that this cluster is spitting out through its Prometheus service. What we can do is if we go back to our Microsoft Azure page, we can either select Azure Managed Grafana or, again, search for it from the search bar. And then we can create our own Grafana workstation that can then be used to capture that information and turn it into nice graphs. So we're going to start that off today. So let me show first how to make a brand new one. And I'll be referring to my instructions that I have on the doc site, just so I get this right. But in this case, we're already on the dashboard. So we just say create. And wants to know what subscription. This is basically who's going to pay for it. So in this case, I'll say it's an internal project. The resource group name, so what group is going to be used for managing permissions and all that kind of thing. And I've got a group over here called Wallaroo CE Group Docs. Location. I would highly encourage the location of your Grafana service to be on the same location as your Kubernetes clusters. That way you're not dealing with a lot of back traffic back and forth. Nothing is stopping you from making that different, but it's just a good practice to have. And the last thing is the name. We can call this wherever we like. Today, I think we can call this, Grafana is awesome, and we can do that. Whatever name, the name has to be DNS compliant, so no spaces or anything like that. Now, everything else can just be as it is. If we go into review and create, we can skip everything else. If you want to set some tags, that's sometimes useful, so you can allocate what budgets it's on. But otherwise, that's really the only information that we needed, was just to know the description, the subscription, the resource group name, location, and the name. Everything else you can leave as default, and then you're good to go. Now, usually I would click create. I'm going to skip that step only because it takes about a good 5 to 10 minutes to spin it up. And rather than waiting, we already have some available. So we've got this one available, test.grafana, that's set up. I'm not going to open it just yet. Before I do that, what I'm going to do now is seeing how this Grafana workstation is up and running. Now let's go back to our cluster and add that in. So if we go back into our, once again, Azure one more time, go back to our services. And as we saw earlier, it was our Wallaroo CE AKS docs cluster that was not running our insight items. So we select insight, and now we will configure it. So it's going to come up a little error message here just because I had halted a previous process for this demonstration, so don't worry about that. But the main thing is that the default workspace is just fine. This is just for the log analytics. The thing we really care about is down here, enable Prometheus metrics. This is what's actually going to be generating all that data that Grafana will be taking in. And then right down here, we have, which Grafana instance? Well, you can select the one that you like. So in this case, I've got two. I'll select my doc test Grafana, and then we'll click configure. And that's really in the process. It's a fairly short thing. Again, it'll take about 5 to 10 minutes as it spins up all those items. So I'm going to skip that step and just go on from there. So let's go ahead and go back then into our Wallaroo CE Helm and go back in Insights. So you can see now we have all these insights that are available off of here, which are fine, but we can also view this in Grafana. And we can do this really one of two ways. The first way, as you can see, is being here in the cluster, selecting Insights, selecting View Grafana, and then selecting the Grafana instance that we care about, which is our doc test Grafana. The other method is if we go back into our Grafana dashboard, select the workstation, and right here it's got an endpoint. And this is why we mentioned earlier about how you want to have that name being DNS compliant, because the name is part of this endpoint. So I'll just select it. And there we go. All right. So Grafana works off of dashboards, and Microsoft managed Microsoft managed Grafana includes some dashboards already available for managed Prometheus, which is what we're using for the cluster. So we'll select the first one here, just as an example, which is Kubernetes Compute Resources Cluster. This provides a cluster level view. So first thing you want to have is your data source. Now in this case, it's selected by default. This was that managed Prometheus item. But from here is the cluster. So you notice we have this Bob demo cluster. You can link multiple Azure clusters, really any other clusters you want that have Prometheus, you can point it at this Grafana machine, and then you can select them from there. So I've got Bob demo cluster. We've got the Will 10 test. He's running a lot of things. And then here's my little Wallaroo CE Helm. So this is giving an overview of the cluster as a whole. So we can see CPU utilization, how much is currently using right now, the limits commitment. So, what's the maximum level going in there, the current memory utilization and what it's looking for. So in our case, you can see we're not using a whole lot, which is fine. But if we're in a situation where we're trying to save the company some money, if this has been going on for some time, we may come back and say, you know what, maybe we don't need to have a big old 64 core running Kubernetes system. We could probably get by on 32 or maybe even 16, save the company some money there and shrink down the RAM and the like. If I scroll down, so we have our CPU usage, we have our memory usage for the whole cluster, and then the network, what's it's actually receiving, what is it sending out, and then we can break things down from there. Now you'll notice we have these different colors in here and labels. These are the different namespaces of the Kubernetes cluster. Let me diverge for just one moment and talk specifically about how Wallaroo works. So when Wallaroo deploys a pipeline that contains one or more model steps where you do your inferencing, each pipeline is its own namespace, Kubernetes namespace. So we can see in here, this is Wallaroo CE Helm, the cluster, and I've got a pipeline in here called stats model pipeline test 01, and this was the 36th one. So we can see, okay, here's how much memory just that particular pipeline in this case, namespace is taking up. Kube system is the default one for most Kubernetes cloud services or Kubernetes in general. So we can see, okay, kube system, not taking up a whole lot. That's fine. It shouldn't have a lot to do. We have our house price pipeline. This is a bigger one that's running a little bit more things, but each of these are running roughly the same amount of information. So we can see right away from this cluster, all right, fairly decent usage. If we go to one of our others, we go back to our will 10 test, you can see, all right, not a lot of utilization. The other day when we were running this, he was running a lot of things and that utilization was jumping up around 50, 60%. Looks like today he's keeping things a little bit more copacetic. And then here on Bob's cluster, he's barely using anything at all. We could tone this guy down and use even fewer resources to save the company some money. So that's looking at the cluster as a whole. We can also drill down a little bit more. If we go back into our dashboards, and we're not going to save this since we had made those changes, but let's take a look at things specifically by the namespaces. So similar thing, data source. This is our managed Prometheus from Azure cluster. Let's go back to our Wallaroo CE Helm. Here, though, we can specify the exact namespace that we care about. So in this case, the namespace is that the stats model pipeline test. That's our pipeline that's deployed with some models. We can open that up and say, okay, it's using about 28% of the CPUs just for this particular namespace and going on from there. So you'll also notice the pods. So these are the individual services, programs, if you will, that are running within this namespace. And if we wanted to, is we go down and see, okay, our CPU utilization and how much this one namespace is taking up. We can take a look at our house price one, use it a little bit more, so we can investigate what's going on in there. But we can really start to drill down even more. So if we wanted to see, we could take a look at the engine, and in our case, the engine LB is the load balancer. So we can look over here and say, all right, CPU usage, not very much, kind of what we expect. It's just a load balancer. The model is deployed via the engine. So we could drill down and select into here and get yet another dashboard and see even more details telling us, all right, well, you're in this namespace and this is the exact pod. This one individual pod looks like it's taking about 1.2 to 1.3% of the CPU just on its own. And then we can get the information from there. So we can drill down more and more. So if we have a situation where we come back to our higher level and take out that dashboard and just look at the cluster as a whole, if we're coming in a situation where we've got like 75, 80, 90% of the CPU utilized, we can start to drill down and say, okay, what's taking up so much stuff? That's a problem. So we see this one here is taking up 5%. All right, let's cube system. Here's our Wallaroo namespace. We can start to, get down further and further and further into what is happening and what's going on. So that is the overall view about how you can start to use Grafana. And there's many more dashboards. There's all sorts of information that I barely even tapped into. But if you're looking for a way of getting the information about what your cluster is doing, what your namespaces in your cluster are doing, what your pods in each namespace are doing, and then if you want to tie this into your Wallaroo deployed cluster, you can use it as a way of seeing, do you need more resources, less resources, more memory, less memory? You kind of get the point from there. And then you can customize these. For those who are Grafana experts, I recommend checking out their documentation and going on in that direction. Mr. Bald, I think that's really all I had to present on this.
No,
but again, you can...
exactly what we want. We're not here to drag things out. We want to get into the technical topic and get right into it. I think one thing, when you were showing, the charts and the graphs, etc., is what role in a company would be using this? Is this for data scientists? Is it for ML engineers or DevOps folks? Like, who would really sort of benefit and using this?
No, it's a good thought. I would probably say usually this may be like the ML ops and the DevOps folks. I mean, your data scientists, they're making your models and sending things out. But I think it's going to be ML ops if they start seeing issues in performance. If you're throwing like 20,000 inferences requests in a second, if you're getting like a slow response speed, this would be a good place to start saying, okay, what's taking so much stuff? Do I need to deploy like replicated versions of models, have like multiple versions in a pipeline so that load balancer can split things off. And then working with the DevOps folks to either increase or decrease your resources as needed. So, and that can go either way. So, as I mentioned earlier, you can have a situation where your inferences are really fast, and maybe the MLOps person can look at this and be like, oh, we are spending too many resources on this. We don't need to. We can throttle this back a bit and save the company some money and allocate those resources where they're needed. But to answer your question, I think it's more the MLOps and the DevOps side of things that will mostly be utilizing this.
Awesome. And the other thing is, I think you mentioned this, but it's good to sort of circle back on is, so if you have multiple clusters, I guess you don't have to create multiple Grafana views. You can have it all in view, right?
Yeah, that's right. In fact, as you saw earlier when I was setting up my my one clusters, I was pointing to this exact same Grafana workstation. These ones are all pointing out here, so I've got 3 different clusters. There's nothing stopping you from just piling that on. Or again, if you're someone who is more familiar with Prometheus service itself, you can have this cluster running anywhere else you want, and then point back to this Grafana service and still get the same dashboard. So Azure does make some nice conveniences. It's just click, 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 and you're in. But there's nothing stopping you from doing this from any other Kubernetes environment that's got the Prometheus service running to get that information back to you.
Awesome. And the other thing is, I mean, this kind of sort of basic question, because I'm not smart to ask any other questions, but so when you look at these graphs, and I guess, colors are like, default, like, can I customize these? If we have an approach to say this color represents, this, we can customize these, yeah?
Yeah, you certainly can. And again, that's not something I've played with that much. I'm usually pretty content with the default view. But yeah, so you can see right here, we can take, and actually let me go into the other dashboard that had the namespaces, just because I really kind of like the information that one gives me from there. So this is showing, let me go back into my cluster and show off this particular pipeline. So yeah, so we've got the pods are running in there. There's nothing stopping me from taking this one here, this engine sidekick, and changing that color to be like purple, and then that would then update from there. Now it was such a small sliver. Let me pick a bigger example here so it's more dramatic. So yeah, you can certainly customize that. There's a lot more, and again, I'm not a complete Grafana expert. Check the docs, but yeah, you can certainly customize these dashboards. And then in my case, instead of going off and leaving them, you could then save them, give them a specific name, and that way it can be used for this exact item. So depending on what you're needing to do and how you're needing to, and who needs to view them, we also have instructions on the doc site about how to restrict access to this Grafana dashboard as well. So if you need to only make this information available to a subset of people, feel free to check that out.
Yeah, I think that's good. So I guess, it's just for, if you look at CPU usage, having that color associated with that, if there's any other dashboards that are getting, created, that you have that ability to template this and have that consistency of view across different dashboards and environments, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. Or you can just make everything black and white if you just want to have a very minimalist view. So do whatever is best for your situation and organization's needs.
Yeah, and I think everybody likes the dark mode. So,
I believe last I heard it uses less energy, so yay for the environment.
That's good. Less energy saves money, right? The long run.
Yep.
So this is fantastic, John. Appreciate it. And if you scroll down a little bit, you've got the memory usage colors there. It remind me of the Gulf oil from the 70s, 60s. That orange. So yeah, awesome. Great. Let me just share my screen out. And so thanks everybody for joining us today. Just quickly, just to wrap things up, as we said, this tutorial is available along with others on our docs.wallaroo.ai site. And as we mentioned, we have a host of other content that you can go through, and you can use the community edition. And so if you want to go up to portal.wallaroo.community, grab your own copy, we install into Azure, AWS, and GCP. So you can set those environments up, and then you can get running and bring in your own models as well. So we have other model conversion tutorials. And so if you're bringing in models there, and we have some videos also that walk you through this on our YouTube channel, as well as install and setup also. So the other thing is, if you are using the Community Edition, we are a Series A startup, and we love to get feedback. We know there's some things that we're doing well, but there's other things we can improve on. And so, it's great to get that feedback from the tech community in this space to say, hey, you know what, this isn't working, or this could be better. That helps us get those requests into the engineering cycle, and then we can improve that experience for users like yourselves. So again, just one last thing. Thanks very much for your time today. Go check out this video later on if you want to revisit it on our YouTube channel, and then look forward to other tech talks that we have coming up. These are every 2 weeks, and we will keep these running and keep these relevant for our tech community. John, thanks again for your time. It's always great to have you on these tech talks, and really appreciate you walking us through this environment and scenario.
Glad to help.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. Have a good day, and I'll talk to you soon. I'll see you soon, hopefully. Bye-bye.
Bye now.